Season 2 of 1923 sees new challenges face the Dutton as winter brings its own set of issues. With the farm struggling, Jacob finds himself on a collision course with destiny as Whitfield casts his gaze on their farm. In true Game of Thrones fashion, winter was coming when we last saw the Yellowstone spin-off series. 1923 Season 2 fully tackles how that changes life at the ranch and presents some unexpected challenges. On a technical aspect, it allows the show to soar. One of my favorite parts of the series is just how gorgeous it looks. There is a very cinematic feel to 1923, with nature playing a key role in the show and motivating many of its characters. Winter paints Montana's backdrops white and offers truly compelling visuals. Alexandra was shocked to learn that she had to go through the U.S. immigration offices on Ellis Island before being allowed to enter the land of liberty after the English ship eventually moored in New York Harbor. The only people who could depart the ship without going through this process were those who had secured their travel documents at the U.S. consulate in London, and Alexandra had neglected to secure any of them since she was in a rush to leave her country. Furthermore, it appeared that the men in the immigration offices spared no one, notwithstanding the fact that Alexandra was a white woman. When a lady was too arrogant, they weren't above hitting her in the stomach. Perhaps, for want of a better phrase, Alexandra's arrival in the new nation was so draining because manners maketh man had a difficult time getting there with the other immigrants. Alexandra reportedly lost all hope of ever seeing Spencer again after suffering through hell. She no longer wanted to compromise her honor in order to seize the chance and enter the United States. She gave the immigration officer the lesson he deserved since she refused to compromise her honor in order to appease him. To persuade the officer that she wasn't a lady he might exploit, she read a piece from Walt Whitman's book. In the new nation, she was able to read and find employment. She even pointed out the lipstick stain on his neck, which prevented him from divorcing. "Welcome to America" was the only thing the embarrassed cock could say. Alexandra and the other immigrants were transported to the city by ferry, and upon landing, she promptly purchased a map from the streets to determine the remaining distance to Bozeman, Montana. After surviving the horrific blizzard, Jake and his companions arrived at the Yellowstone Ranch, where Dr. Miller examined Zane's head injuries closely and determined that he had a subdural hematoma. He had been beaten like a savage by the officers who invaded his home in the first season, and he had received numerous hits to the head. Blood gathered against his skull and pushed against his brain due to the serious brain damage. Zane might not survive if Dr. Miller didn't drain the blood right away. Although Zane wasn't in a fit state to return to town, he informed Jake that he couldn't do the surgery at home. They had no choice but to drill his skull on the ranch. The only issue was that Dr. Miller was not carrying anesthesia, so Zane would have to endure the agony of having his head drilled while he was still aware. Spencer saw a police roadblock as he and Luca were traveling towards Fort Worth after leaving Galveston. In addition to giving him the cash to bribe the officers, Rosario, Luca's cousin, also gave him a revolver in case things didn't go out. Spencer didn't want to take any chances, though. Being labeled a criminal in his own nation would only make it more difficult for him to save his family, so he didn't want that. In order to avoid disappointing his relatives, Luca snatched Spencer's weapon and made the decision to deliver the truck by himself after he informed him that they needed to get rid of the illicit whiskey wagon. As the third episode of 1923 came to a close, Spencer heard distant gunfire. Luca ignored the authorities' attempts to stop him at the barricade. Although the specifics are unknown, it is possible that Luca attempted to bribe the officers and then tried to flee once they refused to accept the money. Even if he survived those bullet wounds, he would be placed in a cage for possessing illegal alcohol. It is likely that one of the officers shot him down to prevent him from fleeing. In the meantime, Spencer, already pressed for time, would hurry to the train station to go to Montana. But I have a feeling he won't be going to Montana by himself. No. He won't run across Alexandra on the way home. He'll probably go with Teonna Rainwater, who is currently in Texas as well. Alexandra took a taxi to the train station in New York and purchased a ticket for Billings, Montana, from which she might have to get another ride to Bozeman, a further 143 miles away. In the conclusion of episode 3, we noticed a dubious man watching Alexandra and pursuing her to the women's rooms, suggesting that he doesn't have the best of intentions. The man at the ticket counter also urged Alexandra to be wary of pickpockets. Will Alexandra's trip to Montana be made even more difficult if this man takes away her money and the ticket she just bought? Well, the next episode will tell us. Tina and Pete informed Runs his horse in the last episode that the campground they were using was no longer a reservation. The area was now owned by several cowboys who had converted it into a ranch after the Quanah people had long since fled. Teonna wanted to remain, but Runs his horse was quite doubtful about the whole event and chose to leave the lands. She persuaded her father that they could risk their lives with the cowboys because she liked the place. Pete assured him that if they allowed them to stay, they could assist them with the strays. Runs his horse chose to locate the rancher, in order to strike a deal because he recognized that Teonna and her lover were unwilling to leave the area. He found the new landowner in episode 3 of 1923 and eventually obtained his consent to camp on his property in return for assisting him in locating his stray cattle. You see, though, that's where he messed up. They were already being pursued by Marshal Kent and Father Renan, and Kent had a very strong suspicion that the fugitives had moved east. The cowboys would hire anyone who could ride a horse, so Kent thought they might be hidden somewhere in Texas looking for work. Before Teonna and the others could make enough money to get to Mexico, Renan and Kent rode swiftly towards Shamrock to apprehend them. In my opinion, Kent would finally track down Teonna, but be unable to apprehend her. Marshal Mamie Fawcett would ultimately rescue Teonna from these malevolent guys, but he would ambush them somewhere in the valley, murdering Pete and running his course. Or perhaps she would attempt to rescue Teonna, while the indigenous would assault Renan and Kent to demand retribution for all the people they had lost at the hands of these two tourists. In order for Teonna to spend the remainder of her days with her people, Mamie would eventually ask Spencer to drive her back to the Crow Reserve and reunite her with her clan.